I opened the app and saw her. There was no mistaking the ponytail, the oversized flashlight, and the ridiculous camo hoodie that still had a department store tag hanging off the side. Karen crept along the edge of the trail like she was in a spy movie, peeking behind trees and crouching low to avoid detection. She made her way to the flagged area, crouched again, and began yanking the stakes from the ground one by one. She tossed them into the bushes, then took a photo of the area with her phone before turning around and disappearing back the way she came. The footage was gold. Not only was she trespassing again, but now she was tampering with marked boundaries. I checked the timestamps, made a second backup, and started drafting another report for the sheriff. But instead of submitting it right away, I held on to it. Karen was getting reckless. I wanted to see just how far she would go. The next afternoon, I drove into town and visited the county office. I asked to pull up every property boundary map for the entire ridge, especially the survey documents from when Karen's house was built. It took an hour, but what I found made my stomach flip. Her property line wasn't just close to mine. It was over mine. A portion of her fancy deck, maybe 20 feet wide, had been built squarely on my land. It looked like the original surveyor either made a mistake or fudged the numbers to push the property out farther than it legally should go. Either way, I had a new card to play. I went back home and spent the evening comparing satellite maps, cross-checking the markers I found on foot, and highlighting discrepancies. When I lined up the angles, it was obvious. Her outdoor patio, the one where she held her fake HOA meetings, wasn't hers at all. It was mine. That fact hit me like a second wind. She had spent all this time trying to make me out as the trespasser, the problem, the threat to her so-called community. But the entire time, she was the one squatting on my land with her folding chairs and plastic wine glasses. By the next morning, another twist had landed on my doorstep. Literally. A folded letter had been slipped under my front door during the night. It was typed, sloppily formatted, and sealed with an imitation HOA logo that looked like it had been printed from an old inkjet. The letter read like a legal document, full of words like injunction and cease operations, demanding that I halt any construction or land modification until further notice. It claimed I was under investigation for violating protected watershed protocols. I laughed out loud when I read that part. I didn't even have running water besides a rain barrel. What tipped me off, though, wasn't the language or the fake logo. It was the signature. Karen had signed it, but used a title I hadn't seen before. Acting President and Land Management Officer, Mountain View HOA. She was escalating her fantasy into full bureaucracy. I called my attorney, a real estate expert who had helped finalize the inheritance transfer from my uncle. He was thorough, calm, and very familiar with rural land dispute. When I told him about the patio overreach and the letter, he immediately offered to start drafting an official cease and desist letter. I told him to wait. I had another idea brewing. That afternoon, I walked the boundary one more time, then staked out the deck area and marked the edge with neon orange ribbon. Then I placed one small sign at the base of the step. It read, "Pending survey review, a property dispute active, entry at risk." Nothing aggressive, just enough to make her nervous. Sure enough, less than an hour after I placed it, Karen stormed down the hill in full panic mode. She was waving her arms before she even crossed the creek. She accused me of vandalizing her property. I told her I was simply marking land that might belong to me based on county records and recent findings. I remained calm, steady, and polite, which seemed to only make her more furious. She threatened to call the county. I encouraged her to do so. She yelled that I was harassing her. I pointed out that I hadn't set foot on her lawn, but she had been on mine 3 times in the past week, including at midnight with a flashlight and gloves. That evening, another police cruiser showed up, different officer this time. He took a full statement from me, accepted the video evidence, and made a copy of the maps I'd printed from the county office. He confirmed what I already suspected. If Karen's deck really crossed the boundary, she could be liable for encroachment and possibly even forced to remove the structure. He didn't say it outright, but I could tell he was familiar with Karen's name. This wasn't her first conflict. The sun dipped behind the ridge as I sat on my porch, sipping the last of my coffee and listening to the wind rustle through the trees. The mountain felt quieter now, like it was watching everything unfold just as patiently as I was. Karen thought she could push, bully, and manipulate her way into control. But what she didn't understand was that I wasn't just fighting for peace. I was defending what was mine. Every inch of this place, every trail, every tree, every stone. And I was just getting started. The next morning started with a buzzing noise overhead. At first I thought it was a wasp or maybe a deerfly, but when I stepped out of the cabin, I saw it. A drone, black and sleek, hovering maybe 20 feet up. It wasn't mine. I hadn't flown my drone in 2 days, and this one was newer, more expensive, with a camera lens that followed my every move. I stared up at it while sipping my coffee, and it bobbed slightly in the air like it was nodding at me. I waved. It didn't wave back, but it did turn and fly off in the direction of Karen's house. I stood there for a long moment, the bitter edge of my drink mixing with the sudden taste of irritation. She had escalated again. That same afternoon, I got an unexpected visit from a man in a khaki uniform driving a white truck with the county logo on the side. He introduced himself as a code enforcement officer, said he had received an anonymous complaint about unauthorized construction and environmental disruption on private land. I didn't even need to ask who sent him. He looked tired, apologetic even, and said he just had to take a look around to verify everything. I welcomed him in, gave him the tour, showed him the cabin, the compost bin, the completely untouched creek, and even the empty tool shed. He scratched his head and said, "I don't see a single violation here. Not one. But she's been emailing every day." He didn't say her name, but we both knew who he meant. I asked him if this kind of thing happened often. He said with a sigh that Karen was what they called a repeat flagger. Someone who had made dozens of complaints in the past year alone, ranging from noise to wildlife abuse to illegal bonfires. Most had no basis. Some were complete fabrications. He assured me nothing on my land broke any laws or codes. Then he asked if I had ever considered fencing the boundary. I told him I liked the wild look of the woods. He nodded slowly and said, "Sometimes boundaries need more than paper. They need to be seen." As he drove off, I started thinking. That night, I drafted plans for a fire lookout tower. Nothing big or aggressive, just a small wooden structure about 12 feet high at the edge of one of the upper ridges, well within my property and fully legal under county law. It would give me a perfect view of the whole mountain, and a perfect message to Karen. "You're not invisible." I submitted the plan to the county and got it approved within 3 days. By the end of the week, the foundation was already poured. By the second week, the frame stood tall and proud against the tree line. Karen noticed immediately. I spotted her walking her chihuahua right to the edge of her lawn and staring at the tower like it was a missile launcher. She pulled out her phone, took several photos, and then pointed up at the structure like she was casting a spell. I didn't say a word. I just waved from the platform, sipping water and enjoying the view. The tower was solid, simple, and exactly what I needed. It was also driving her insane. The next phase of her war came in the form of a petition. I found a copy of it stuffed into my mailbox even though it was clearly marked with a no solicitation sign. The paper was headlined, "Emergency Petition to Revoke Invasive Construction and Remove Unauthorized Structures from Protected Mountain Zone." It was printed on glossy paper, and had Karen's name and new fake title at the bottom. Community Defense Coordinator. Under that was a list of 20 or so names, all neighbors, a few I had never even seen before. Some I recognized from her backyard gatherings. A few had messy signatures like they didn't really care. I read the whole thing and nearly laughed out loud. It accused me of turning the mountain into a commercial development. Said I had endangered wildlife habitats, created a fire hazard, and disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. There was even a paragraph claiming I might be storing hazardous materials underground, possibly explosives. That one was bold, even for Karen. Instead of responding, I called a neighbor who I had spoken to a few times. His name was Doug, a retired land surveyor with a slow drawl and a sharp memory. I asked if he had really signed the petition. He snorted and said, "Karen told me it was about paving the trailhead." I didn't read the fine print. I told him about the tower, about the letter, about the drone. Doug paused and said something that stuck with me. "That woman doesn't know where she ends and other people begin." A few days later, Doug showed up at my door with a yellowed manila folder. Inside were old maps, some dating back over 40 years, showing original boundaries and survey lines for the whole ridge. He pointed to the section where Karen's property overlapped mine. "I always knew that line was off," he said, "but nobody wanted the headache." I thanked him and made high-resolution scans of everything. Now I had historical proof. And leverage. That weekend, Karen held another backyard HOA meeting. I didn't need binoculars to tell it was heated. Voices were raised. One man actually stood up and walked away mid-sentence. A woman in yoga pants crossed her arms and started crying. Karen was visibly flustered, her papers flapping in the wind like panicked birds. The group started thinning out, one by one, until only 2 people remained. Even from my tower, I could see she was losing her grip. The final straw came when I received an official envelope in the mail marked with the State Wildlife Service seal. It said a complaint had been lodged accusing me of disturbing the nesting patterns of endangered birds with my tower. I knew it was nonsense, but they had to investigate. The agent they sent out was friendly and professional. He checked the tower, inspected the nearby trees, and said there were no nests within miles. Then he asked, off the record, "Has someone been harassing you?" I told him the story. He rolled his eyes and said, "We've had 3 of these in 2 months. All from the same sender." I nodded. "Let me guess. Pink windbreaker. Smells like lavender and lawsuit." After he left, I sat on the tower platform as the sun dipped behind the distant hills. The sky turned gold, then orange, then purple. Below, the trees swayed like they were whispering secrets to each other. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the silence fill me. Karen had played every card she had, and each one had backfired. She thought she could drown me in noise, in paper, in drones and drama. But the mountain had a longer memory. And now it had a watchtower. The sun had barely risen when my attorney arrived, dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and jeans that looked brand new. His name was Mason, a quiet man with the kind of calm that unsettles bullies more than shouting ever could. He stepped out of his car with a briefcase in one hand and a large cardboard tube in the other. I poured him a cup of coffee, and we sat on the porch as the morning mist curled around the trees. He laid out the documents on the picnic table and got straight to the point. Based on all the evidence, the historical maps, and the current boundary records, Karen's deck was undeniably built on my land. And not just a few inches. Nearly 32 feet of it extended over the legal line, including her outdoor kitchen and half of her so-called community meeting area. Mason looked up from the maps and asked how far I wanted to take this. I told him I wanted options. He nodded slowly and said, "Then we start with a motion of encroachment. Simple, clean, legal." Mason submitted the motion to the county office that same day, and within 48 hours we received confirmation that a public zoning hearing would be scheduled. Karen, of course, found out almost immediately. I didn't tell her. She heard from someone else. Probably one of the neighbors who was starting to question her leadership now that her empire was cracking. I saw her that evening standing on her porch, arms crossed, staring at my cabin like she could melt it with her eyes. The tower loomed behind me like a silent sentinel. She didn't wave. She didn't shout. She just stood there, a statue carved from spite. The hearing was set for the following week at the county building in town. I wore jeans and a flannel shirt. Mason wore the same quiet confidence as always. Karen arrived in a beige suit with oversized sunglasses and a stack of homemade